Thank you very much. To the Secretary of State, if I may, if we are to have a foreign policy that is resilient enough to withstand shock and not be accused by our allies or our opponents of being reactionary, can I just ask you what has changed recently? What has changed either with the threat or with their capabilities or with their intent? Because for many of us, you know, the attack in Paris is not a shift in what they can achieve. It's an MO we've seen before. It's a capability we know they have. So what has changed now to bring this before Parliament?
Well, the nature of the campaign against ISIL, as I said, has begun to change as we've begun to have some success in Iraq. But the threat from ISIL has intensified. And let me put it this way. There were some 15 ISIL-inspired attacks, either ISIL-inspired or ISIL-directed. There were some 15 around the world in last year. This year, there have already been 150, and we have another month to go. So the threat has intensified. We've seen in the last few weeks attacks in Ankara, in Beirut, in Paris, and elsewhere in Western Europe. So the threat has certainly intensified. What else has changed? Clearly, two other international things have changed. We've had we've had the United Nations resolution that has unanimously called on all members of the United Nations to use their capabilities to suppress this terrorist organisation and to eradicate, those are the words in the resolution, to eradicate its safe havens. That wasn't the case a year ago, so that has changed. And finally, there are much more promising signs now of a widespread agreement on a different future for Syria. We've seen the engagement in the Vienna process of Russia, but also Saudi Arabia and Iran, of Turkey, as well as other European countries, in helping to persuade everybody to a Syrian government that is much more representative, involves some of these moderate opposition forces that have been fighting Assad, and starts to design a future for Syria without Assad. That has really changed in the last couple of months.
So do you think that our international partners who we are engaged in this with, do you think that we are entering this conflict at the right time? Are we too late? Are we too early? And how is that? How are we? Could you honestly, hand on heart, say that we have not been affected in our international standing by coming to this conflict at this late time? Or judging on what you've just said, do you think it is just the right time?
Well, our international standing was certainly affected by the vote back in 2013. But we've been operating since the vote in 2014, giving us permission to strike in Iraq. We've been operating, obviously, at that limit of parliamentary authority. But since then, as I said, the threat has very much intensified. We've had direct requests in the light of the Paris slaughter, very direct requests from France to come to the aid of France, which we're responding to. We're allocating a Type 45 destroyer to guard the Charles de Gaulle. We've been making other assistance available to the French in terms of border security and greater shared intelligence. But they would also like the RAF to join in the strikes that they're now designing against very specific targets in the Raqqa heartland. But the answer to your question, I think, in the end, is that we are one of the leading countries in the world. We have some of the most skilled and well-equipped and powerful armed forces in the world. The United Nations and our allies now expect us to join this fight.
Seems to be.